The first lie my wife ever told me was small. She told me she loved rain. I remember that because our first date happened during a storm. We were sitting in my old truck outside a closed diner, eating fries from a paper bag, laughing because the windshield wipers sounded like they were dying. She looked at the rain running down the glass and said, "I love nights like this." For 7 years, I believed that was who Natalie was. Simple. Warm. Loyal. The kind of woman who could sit beside you in a broken truck and make you feel like you were already home. I was wrong. Because years later, on another rainy night, I learned Natalie didn't love rain. She loved anything that could hide footsteps. She loved anything that made people look down, rush inside, close curtains, ignore details. And I learned that the woman I had built my whole life around had been using storms to meet another man. My name is Ethan Cole. I am 38 years old. I work as a structural inspector, which sounds boring until you realize my entire job is noticing cracks before buildings collapse. Funny thing is, I could see damage in concrete from across a parking lot. But I couldn't see my own marriage falling apart right beside me. For most of our marriage, I thought Natalie and I were building something solid. We lived in a modest house outside Asheville. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, a garage that always smelled like sawdust because I liked restoring old furniture when I had time. The one valuable thing I owned wasn't our house. It was a lake cabin my father left me. It sat 40 minutes outside town, tucked behind pine trees, with a porch that leaned slightly to the left and a dock that creaked if you stepped on the third board too fast. My father built that cabin with his own hands after he came home from the military. He used to say, "A man needs one place in the world where nobody can make him feel small." When he died, he left it to me in a trust. Not because it was worth millions. Because it meant something. Natalie hated that cabin. At first, she pretended she didn't. She would smile when I suggested weekends there. She would bring coffee to the porch. She would take pictures of the lake at sunrise and post them online with captions about peace and gratitude. But after a few years, her real feelings started slipping out. "It's too far. It smells old. We could sell it and buy something better." Then her parents started saying the same things. Her mother, Diane, would sit at our dinner table and say, "Ethan, you're being sentimental. Property is property." Her father, Frank, would nod like he was giving business advice instead of asking me to erase the last piece of my father. Natalie's younger brother, Mason, had debts. Bad ones. He had tried 3 businesses, failed at all of them, and somehow every failure became someone else's emergency. Then suddenly the cabin became the solution. Sell the cabin. Help Mason. Save the family. I said no. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just no. That was when Natalie changed. She stopped touching my shoulder when she passed me in the kitchen. She stopped asking about my day. She started staying late at the office, taking calls in the driveway, turning her phone face down like the screen was something dirty. I asked her once if something was wrong. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'm tired of being married to a man who cares more about dead people than living family." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it hurt. Because it sounded rehearsed. 2 weeks later, my father's watch disappeared. It was an old silver pocket watch. Not worth much to anyone else, but to me it was priceless. My grandfather gave it to my father before his first deployment. My father carried it every day. When I was a kid, he would let me hold it on Sundays after church. The ticking was soft and steady. Like a heartbeat. I kept it in the top drawer of my dresser, wrapped in a blue cloth. One morning it was gone. I emptied the drawer. Checked the closet. Looked under the bed. Searched the garage, the truck, the cabin, everywhere. Natalie watched from the bedroom doorway. "Maybe you moved it," she said. I didn't. "You've been stressed." I turned and looked at her. She didn't look worried. She looked annoyed. That was the first real crack I noticed. 3 days later, I got a call from a pawn shop on the east side of town. The man on the phone asked if I was Ethan Cole. I said yes. He said, "We found your number inside an old watch case. Someone brought it in last week. We're required to hold certain items before resale. Thought you might want to know." I drove there during my lunch break with rain tapping against the windshield. The shop owner placed my father's watch on the counter. For a second I couldn't speak. I just stared at it. Then he slid over a copy of the pawn ticket. The signature at the bottom was Natalie's. But the payment card attached to the transaction belonged to a man named Caleb Voss. Caleb was not a stranger. Caleb was my best friend. At least, that was what I had called him for 11 years. We met when we were both broke, both working construction jobs, both trying to become something better than what people expected from us. I helped him study for his real estate license. He helped me rebuild my garage after a tree fell through the roof. He stood beside me at my wedding. He gave a speech about loyalty. And now his name was on the receipt for my father's stolen watch. I bought the watch back with my own money and drove home in silence. That night, Natalie came in late. Her hair was damp from the rain. She smelled like perfume I hadn't bought her. She walked into the bedroom and froze when she saw the watch sitting on my nightstand. For 1 second, her face emptied. Then the performance began. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You found it." I sat on the edge of the bed. "Where did it go, Natalie?" She swallowed. "I don't know." "Try again." Her eyes filled with tears too quickly. That was how I knew they weren't real. "I borrowed against it," she said. "Just temporarily. Mason needed money. I was going to get it back." "You stole my father's watch." "I was desperate." "You signed the ticket." "I made a mistake." "Caleb paid." "That changed everything." Her mouth opened but no sound came out. I watched my wife search for a lie and fail. Then she did what guilty people do when truth corners them. She attacked. "You're spying on me now?" I almost laughed. The watch was on my side of the room. My father's watch. Taken from my drawer. And somehow I was the criminal. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call Caleb. I just asked one question. "How long?" Natalie blinked. "How long what?" "How long have you and Caleb been sleeping together?" Her tears disappeared. The room went so quiet I could hear the rain hitting the gutter outside. Then she said the sentence that ended my marriage. "You were never supposed to find out like this." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "It didn't mean anything." Not, "I love you." Just that. You were never supposed to find out like this. Like the betrayal wasn't the problem. The timing was. I stood up, took my pillow from the bed and walked to the guest room. She followed me down the hall. "Ethan, wait. We need to talk." "No. You can't just shut down." "I can tonight." She grabbed my arm. I looked down at her hand until she let go. The next morning her entire family knew. Not because I told them. Because Natalie called them first. That was her second mistake. She controlled the first version of the story. She told them she made one bad decision because I had become cold, distant, obsessed with my father's memory. She said Caleb had been emotionally supportive. She said I had pushed her away. By noon her mother called me. "You need to be a man about this," Diane said. I was standing on a job site in a hard hat watching workers pour concrete. "A man?" I asked. "Yes. Marriage is complicated. Natalie is fragile right now." I looked at the wet concrete spreading inside the frame. "Fragile people don't steal dead men's watches." Diane gasped like I had slapped her. She was trying to help her brother. "With Caleb's money?" Silence. Then she said, "You are being cruel." Frank called next. He told me divorce would embarrass everyone. Mason texted me and called me selfish. By evening, even Caleb had the nerve to show up at my house. I saw him through the front window, standing under the porch light like a man arriving to fix a misunderstanding. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked tired. Nervous. "Ethan," he said. "Brother, this got out of hand." I stared at him. "Brother." That word sounded disgusting in his mouth. "It wasn't planned," he said. "Which part? My wife or my father's watch?" He looked down. Natalie was unhappy. I nodded slowly. "And stealing from me made her happy?" His jaw tightened. "You don't know the whole story." "You're right," I said. "But I will." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I think that was the moment he realized I wasn't broken. I was quiet. There is a difference. Broken men beg. Quiet men document. For the next 9 days, I became the man everyone underestimated. Natalie moved into her parents' house temporarily. She took half the closet, her laptop, 3 suitcases, and the dog we adopted together, even though that dog had slept beside my side of the bed for 6 years. She left her old tablet behind. That was her third mistake. I didn't hack anything. I didn't need to. The tablet was connected to our shared cloud account, the same one she had insisted we use for bills, photos, and calendars because married people shouldn't have secrets. Apparently married people should only have secrets when they are hers. The first thing I found was a calendar. Not the normal one. A hidden shared calendar under Caleb's email. Hotel names. Dinner reservations. Cabin discussion. Lawyer call. That last one made my stomach go cold. I clicked it. The note attached said, Trust restriction? Need Ethan's signature. Natalie says emotional pressure may work. Pregnancy announcement before final push. Pregnancy announcement. I sat there in my dark kitchen, the tablet glowing in my hands. Natalie wasn't pregnant. At least she had never told me she was. 2 days later she did. She came to the house with her mother and father like they were bringing official news from a courtroom. I let them in. Natalie stood in the living room wearing a cream coat, hands folded over her stomach. Her mother looked at me with the smug sadness of someone who believed she had already won. Natalie said, "I'm pregnant." I didn't react. Frank cleared his throat. "This changes things," he said. Diane nodded. "That child deserves stability." I looked at Natalie. "How far along?" Her eyes flicked to her mother. 8 weeks. I nodded. 8 weeks. I had been away for work during the week she would have conceived. 3 nights in Charlotte inspecting a hospital expansion. I still had the hotel receipts. Natalie knew that. Or maybe she forgot. Guilty people remember their lies. They forget your proof. Diane stepped closer. "You need to think about the baby now. Not your pride. Not that cabin. Not revenge." There it was. The cabin. Again. Frank put a folder on my coffee table. "We spoke to someone," he said. "There may be a way to restructure the trust if both spouses agree. Selling the property would give everyone a fresh start." I stared at the folder. Everyone. Not me. Everyone else. Natalie's voice softened. "Ethan, I know I hurt you. But this baby needs us. We can use the cabin money to pay debts, get counseling, and start over somewhere new." She reached for my hand. I moved it away. Her face hardened for half a second. Just enough for me to see the real Natalie underneath. I said, "Leave the folder." Frank frowned. "You'll consider it?" "I'll read it." That satisfied them. They left thinking I was bending. I was not bending. I was measuring the pressure before the collapse. That night I drove to the cabin. Rain followed me the whole way. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood in the silence. The place smelled like pine, dust, and lake air. On the wall above the fireplace hung a photo of my father standing on the dock in his old brown jacket, smiling like life had beaten him but never owned him. For the first time since discovering the affair, I cried. Not for Natalie. Not for Caleb. For the version of myself that had believed love could make selfish people honest. I sat at my father's kitchen table and opened my laptop. Then I started building my own folder. Bank transfers. Calendar entries. Hotel reservations. The pawn ticket. Screenshots. Emails between Caleb and a real estate attorney. Messages where Natalie told Caleb, "Once Ethan signs, we're free." One message stopped me cold. "Caleb, what if the baby comes out looking like me?" Natalie, "By then he'll already be tied to us legally." I leaned back in the chair and stared at the screen until the words blurred. That was not a mistake. That was a plan. The next morning I called a lawyer. Her name was Angela Price. She was sharp, calm, and did not waste words. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do not sign anything. Do not threaten anyone. Do not reveal what you have yet." Yet? "Let them keep talking," she said. "People like this always do." So I did. For 3 weeks, I acted exactly how they expected me to act. Wounded. Confused. Tired. Natalie sent long messages about forgiveness. Diane sent Bible verses about family. Frank sent articles about children needing 2 parents. Mason sent nothing because Mason only spoke when he needed money. Caleb disappeared. But his name kept appearing in documents. Angela discovered that Caleb had already contacted a developer about the land around the cabin. Not just the cabin itself. The land. The trees. The dock. The place where my father taught me to fish. They weren't trying to sell a house. They were trying to carve up my father's memory and turn it into vacation rentals. Then came the dinner invitation. Natalie asked me to come to her parents' house on Sunday. "Just family," she wrote. "We need to talk like adults." I asked who would be there. She said her parents, Mason and Caleb. Caleb. At a family dinner. With my pregnant wife. That was almost funny. I forwarded the message to Angela. She replied with 4 words. "Go. Bring the folder." So I did. On Sunday evening, I put on a dark shirt, drove through light rain, and parked outside Diane and Frank's perfect brick house. Through the front window, I could see them in the dining room. Natalie sat beside Caleb. Not across from him. Beside him. Her hand rested near his on the table. When I walked in, everyone went silent. Diane smiled too brightly. Frank stood like he was about to negotiate a business deal. Mason avoided my eyes. Caleb looked at me and nodded. I ignored him. Natalie stood and touched her stomach. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I placed the black folder on the dining table. No one spoke. Diane looked at it first. Then Frank. Then Caleb. Natalie's face changed. Because some part of her knew. Before I said a word, she knew the man she had betrayed had not come there to beg. I had come there to let the truth sit down at the table with us. Frank cleared his throat. "What is that?" I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. Then I looked at my wife, my best friend, and the family that had chosen her lies over my life. I said, "This is the reason none of you should have invited me here." I opened the black folder slowly. Not because I wanted drama. Because I wanted every person at that table to understand that the next few minutes were going to cost them more than they were ready to pay. Natalie's mother, Diane, leaned back in her chair. Frank crossed his arms. Mason stared at the table like the wood grain had suddenly become fascinating. Caleb tried to smile. That was the strangest part. He actually tried to smile. Like this was still something he could talk his way out of. "Ethan," Caleb said, "before you do whatever you think you're doing, maybe we should all calm down." I looked at him. "You had 11 years to call me brother," I said. "You lost the right to use my name with confidence." His smile disappeared. Natalie touched his arm under the table. Small movement. Quick. But everyone saw it. Especially me. Diane's eyes narrowed at her daughter's hand. For the first time, doubt entered the room. I pulled out the pawn ticket first and placed it in the center of the table. "My father's watch," I said. "Stolen from my bedroom. Pawned by Natalie. Paid for by Caleb." Diane swallowed. Frank picked up the paper, read it, then looked at Natalie. "Natalie?" She immediately started crying. "They used to work on me. It didn't anymore. I was desperate," she whispered. "Mason needed help." Mason lifted his head. "Don't put that on me." Natalie turned toward him sharply. "You did need help. Not from his dead father's watch." That surprised me. Mason was selfish, reckless, and always in debt. But even he understood there were lines you didn't cross. Frank placed the pawn ticket down like it burned his fingers. Caleb leaned forward. "It was supposed to be temporary." I looked at him. "Like my wife." His jaw tightened. Diane gasped, but I kept going. I pulled out the printed calendar pages. Hotel reservations. Dinner dates. Lawyer call. Cabin discussion. I placed them one by one on the table. Every page made Natalie's face lose more color. Frank picked up one sheet. His eyes moved left to right. Then again. Then again. "What is this?" he asked. "That is your daughter planning my divorce before she told me she was pregnant." Natalie slammed her hand on the table. "You don't get to twist this." I almost laughed. "Twist it?" She stood up. "You were cold. You were impossible to talk to. You made me feel alone." I nodded. "So you slept with my best friend, stole from me, tried to force me to sell my father's cabin, and planned to trap me with another man's child?" The room went silent. Diane's mouth opened. Frank slowly turned toward Natalie. Caleb's eyes dropped. That was all the confirmation anyone needed. Natalie realized it too late. Her voice became small. "You don't know that." I reached back into the folder. "I know I was in Charlotte during the week you claimed the baby was conceived." I placed my hotel receipts on the table. 3 nights. Work inspection. Hospital expansion. Angela already verified it. "Angela?" Frank asked. "My lawyer." That word changed the temperature of the room. Lawyer. Suddenly this was not a family argument anymore. It was evidence. Natalie sat down slowly. Caleb whispered, "You hired a lawyer?" I looked at him. "You hired one first." Then I placed the emails on the table. Emails between Caleb and a real estate attorney. Emails about trust restrictions. Emails about how Natalie could pressure me. Emails about developer interest in the cabin land. Frank read the first page. Then the second. By the third, his hands were shaking. Diane snatched one from him and read it herself. Her face changed from anger to confusion to horror. She looked at Caleb. "You wanted the land?" Caleb didn't answer. Diane looked at Natalie. "You told me this was about the baby." Natalie started crying again. It is. "No," I said quietly. "It was about money." Then I pulled out the final page. The message Caleb had sent her. "What if the baby comes out looking like me?" And Natalie's reply. "By then he'll already be tied to us legally." I put it in front of Frank. "You read it?" Then he sat back like someone had punched the air out of him. Diane covered her mouth. Mason whispered, "Jesus." Natalie lunged for the paper. I moved it away before she could grab it. Copies, I said. Angela has everything. Caleb stood. This is illegal. I looked up at him. What part? The part where I found documents in a shared account? Or the part where you helped my wife steal from me and tried to take my property? He pointed at me. You don't know what you're doing. That was the last mistake he made in that room. Frank stood up. Sit down, Caleb. Caleb blinked. Frank's voice grew harder. I said sit down. Caleb sat. For years, Frank had treated me like I was weak because I didn't yell. That night, he finally understood silence can be stronger than rage. I turned to Natalie. I'm filing for divorce. She shook her head. No. Yes. You can't abandon your child. I looked at her stomach. That child deserves the truth. That starts with a DNA test. Her face twisted. You're disgusting. No, I said. I'm free. Diane started crying then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly with one hand over her mouth. She had defended her daughter blindly. She had called me cruel. She had told me to be a man while her daughter and Caleb planned to strip me of the only thing my father left me. Now the truth was sitting in front of her in black and white. Frank looked older than he had 10 minutes earlier. Ethan, he said, I didn't know. I believe you. He exhaled. But you didn't ask, I said. His eyes dropped. That hurt him more than anger would have. Natalie reached across the table toward me. Ethan, please. We can still fix this. I stared at her hand. 7 years ago, that hand had held mine in an old truck during a storm. Now it looked like a stranger's hand. There is no we, I said. Caleb laughed bitterly. You think you won? You lost your wife. I turned to him. No, Caleb. I lost the illusion of a wife.